Ready.
No, stop cutting me off. Now go.
Okay.
It's going to be on the video, I'm telling you.
You're going to start from start to finish getting a plant in the ground. Okay. So this bed, for 2 years ago, we filled this with old manure, aged manure. Let it sit for 2 years, just like these guys are doing. And then last fall, this was tilled and we put compost down. And so it's been sitting here since last fall with just the compost sitting on top. And we make our own compost, and it's full of earthworms or full of redworms. And so there's going to be lots of worms in this bed. So all we have right now is really bad sandy soil, lots of composted manure and compost, okay? Or aged manure and compost. So you can see I have my drips. Tomato plants, we put 3 feet apart. So wherever you're planting them, if they're closer than 3 feet, you're gonna lose production, all right? So I mark where my drip line is. This is gonna take just a second, but I'm putting in a gopher cage. You can see all my beautiful worms are moving around. The more worms, the better. And just a side note, when I came out 2 days ago to get this bed ready, there was a gopher that had just come up over there. I set my gopher hawk, went in for lunch, came out 30 minutes later, and I'd already caught it. Now that's not always the case. I'm not usually 100% that good. But I was like really proud of myself because I was like, 30 minutes! Okay, so we're gonna stick this guy in here. And I want this to be above the ground level. And then I'm gonna throw some dirt in. To hold it up straight. Now, you guys look around if you're feeling like you're behind in your garden. Like this has been an insane year. So all of the weeds and everything, and because we're organic, we don't spray anything. We're really behind too, and usually I am putting plants in second week in March, and this is my first plant going in the ground this year. So, and my plants, those are them over there. So you see some of the big huge ones that are in there. They're still ready, I mean they're certainly ready to go in the ground, but they're not like too far gone. So I'm gonna squeeze, take them out of the pot. And the first thing I'm gonna do is take my little clippers and I'm gonna remove all of my growth that's down low. And you can actually remove your growth all the way up to the very top if you wanted to. And I'll explain some reasons why you would want to do that here in a second. But I want to just make sure I'm taking them off to where, okay, so I'm going to do that for now. So this guy, you notice how blue he is?
Yeah.
So this is anthocyanin. This is the blue that makes blueberries blue. It's an antioxidant, and there's a lot of blue tomatoes now that are being put on the market. They were all started by a guy named Brad Gates from Wild Boar Farm right here in California. And now everybody's copying him. But the blue came from a wild tomato in Mexico that he found, and he started breeding the blue into his tomatoes because, number one, it's an antioxidant, so it's good for you. Number two, it keeps your tomatoes from rotting so quickly. And so they will hang on the vine longer without rotting, and they'll sit on your counter longer without rotting. But they are all of his plants they are not hybrids. They're open pollinated, so you can save seeds from them and you'll get the same plant the next year. So this guy is a new one we're testing this year called Queen of the Night. And it's expressing the anthocyanin in the plant. Some of them will only express it on the stem, but his has got it, this one's got it on the plant and on the stem. So I'm gonna break up my root ball because these guys are so pot bound. And if you notice, you see the little bumps on the stem right here on this main stem? We get people every year go say, what's wrong with my tomato? It's got bumps all over the stem. That's a good sign. They do this because tomatoes want to root the entire on the entire main stem of the branch. And so this tomato is saying, I'm out of room and I need to root out somewhere else, and it's trying to find soil. So the more of your main stem that is in the ground, the more it's going to set root and set fruit faster and be stronger. So one of the ways that people plant really tall tomatoes is they'll cut everything off, like I said, up to the top, and they trench plant. Instead of digging a hole, they dig a trench and they lay the plant down like this, and then they just leave the top sticking out, and you don't try to stand it up because you'll snap the top right off. You just let it hang out sideways, and in a couple of days it'll reach up for the sun. And so then you've got that whole thing in the ground. It doesn't work if you're using gopher cages because you can't lay them trench ways that way. So we just plant them deep. So that's why I've got the hole so deep and I didn't fill it back up, so that I can fill in for the plant. I want just enough in there to make it stand up. And then on top of my aged manure and my compost, should have put that earlier, brand new bag. It's Velcro, never seen that before. So this is just organic fertilizer, and this one, the numbers on it are 346. If you listened to our talk last time, and it talks about the nitrogen has to be the lowest number. Nitrogen is your first number. So 346, 3 is the lowest number. So we're good. And I'm just going to feed this guy a little bit right off the bat. And then I need to pull off the little tape. Okay, so the tape comes off. And then I have this nice bamboo stick that I'm going to put in the place. Separate these guys, and this is my own little hillbilly hack. I take tie tape and it, what are these called?
Clothespin.
Clothespin, thank you. My goodness. And I'm going to wrap it around the top to hold it. This works great because you can move it up easily as your plant gets bigger. And if your plant gets so big that it's pulling against it, by that time it can open it and pop your clothespin off, and you just can go find it later. And sometimes when these plants are 6-8 feet tall, they don't need the clothespin anymore. So they're doing just fine. Okay, so then I'm going to fill this in. And I'm going to do one more little sprinkle. And then, even though we are going to have these guys on drip, I have to have a way to water them. So I'm going to make a well, and then the well will just stay there. It's not going to, once I've watered them in, it's not going to be used anymore. But if you're watering with wells the whole season, you're going to want to make your well bigger than I'm going to make mine, so that you can fill it with more water. Lost some of my dirt there. Okay, so now you see I've got it filled in. See how this guy's touching the ground? He's got to go. You don't want any of your leaves touching the ground on your plants. And if you listen to the garden talk from last time, that's how disease travels up your plant. And so we don't want to have any of them touching the ground. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove that guy too. And even though this looks like, wow, you're taking this big, full, beautiful plant and you're making him a little stick with a couple things on top, it's gonna fill in really big and it's not gonna matter. Now, if you're getting your plants from us and we handwrite all these little tags, and we hear people all the time say, well, I went back later and the whole thing was bleached out and I couldn't read it anymore. When we put our tags in, we put them upside down. And that way the sun doesn't hit them. And then we're gonna come back after we get the bed completely planted, and we're gonna put straw mulch, just like how you can see in all these beds, we have tons of straw mulch. We put straw mulch about this deep, and that's gonna keep the weeds from coming up. It's gonna keep your water from evaporating too fast, so you don't have to water as often, and keeps the plants from having to compete with weeds that take the nutrients away from them. So the last thing, this is my one product that I absolutely love, and I have extra empty packages because I go through about 12 of these a year. So if you guys want to take an empty package, you can, and that way you know what we're using. So these are, the numbers are 274. So the lowest number is the nitrogen. One of our gals that's our volunteers, and we were talking about this at the last at the last talk, is that just because it has a tomato on the front of it does not mean that it's good for tomatoes. And she had gone to the store after our talk and found a product called something like Mater Booster and had a big tomato on the front of it, and the highest number on it was the first number. So basically this company is making a product that they're going to sell you. You're going to feed it to your tomatoes. The tomatoes are going to get huge and you're going to go, wow, that's a great product, and then they're not going to set fruit. So you've got to have that low number if you want them to set fruit. So the reason I love these guys is because they're time released. So the little bit that I put in my bed of this stuff is going to feed them right away. This stuff is going to feed them over a couple of months. Now it lasts longer for me because I've got them on drips. If you're flooding your plants, you are going to have to go back usually around August and put more of them in. But there's 50 in a bag. We use 8 for every plant if it's a tomato, and 6 if it's a pepper. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, make sure my well is set, and then I'm gonna water this guy in. Okay, now once we got to this property and we have these big long rows, we are now growing on what's called field twine. This is how farmers who are growing indeterminate plants grow them in their fields. And so even though I haven't started the field twine, I'll explain to you how it works if you're growing in long rows. This is like so much better than cages because it's easier to set up and easier to maintain and easier to tear down at the end of the season. So field twine comes in a box like this with holes in the side for you to run a belt through it. I just use this strap and I strap it to my waist so that I have both of my hands. And then the twine comes outside here. If you have really tall T-posts, I wish ours were taller than this because our plants get so tall, you can run your twine through a piece of PVC so that you don't have to reach up over the top of it. You can just go like this with a piece of PVC and your twine is already on it. But because ours isn't that high, we're gonna start like down here. We tie it on, we run to the first one, go around, second one, go around, third one, we wrap twice. Once around, twice around, once around, twice around, until you get to the end. Wrap it twice, go to the other side and come back down this way. And so you end up with the twine pieces, they're this far apart, and they're holding the tomato plant in the middle. So once I get this whole bed planted, I will run this twine down that side, come down this side, and you wrap it the same way, coming down this way. Then I'll tie it off. When the plants get to this height, I'll make another row, and I go and do it. So throughout the whole season until we reach the top, then we've got the twine going all the way across. Then at the end of the season, when the plants have gone up over the top, back down to the bottom, and are now heading out in all directions, that's usually about November. When it's time to clean up, we go through and we snip all the strings. The plants fall over, we come through with nippers and we cut them all off and we haul off the vines. So it's super fast. But if you've got a small area and you're not doing your plants in rows, most likely you're using cages. And at the last talk, we talked about how the cone cages should be outlawed because they're completely useless. So these are the kind of cages. Some of these guys, I think, are over 20 years old that we have. And we now use these for peppers because we used to grow the tomatoes on them. But this is concrete mesh that you buy at Home Depot. Comes in flat panels. I have some of the flat panels laying around out here because we grow the flat ones. We could do cucumbers on them. I don't know how much they are now, but they used to be like $6 a panel. And you just cut this piece on one side so that you've got spikes sticking out, bend it around, and then bend them back together again. So that's how it holds it together. Some of the mesh will also have wire at the bottom. You just cut that off so you've got spikes, and then you can stick them in the ground like that, okay? The one thing I really miss about having cages that doesn't work with field twine is this insane weather. I don't know if you guys remember last year, we got a freeze in May. And it was like, what am I gonna do? I've got all my tomato plants in the ground, and we were out here with frost fabric trying to connect it to the sides of these T-posts to protect our plants, and we did. But the cages work a lot better for that. If you've seen over there, we have this stuff for sale in packages. This is a remnant. The stuff that's for sale over there is actually 3 feet wide. So because this is obviously not 3 feet wide, it was just an end piece that I had, but I wanted to use it to show you guys what we do. So you would take your frost fabric, helps if the wind cooperates, and you'd put it all the way down at the bottom. But since I don't have the bottom, it'll be like this. Clothespins, dollar store. I go through a lot of them. And you just attach it down, and this is going to protect if you have a crazy frost, which we still could 3 days ago we had a frost. So
you don't cover the top of them?
so you, and we also, the only time we cover the top of them is if the frost is going to go like down into the 20s, or if we're expecting hail. Because the hail will shred your plants, and we have had many times we've run out when there's a thunderstorm headed and we're throwing frost fabric over the tops of the cages so that the plants don't get shredded. The nice thing about fabric instead of the plastic is the plastic will fry your plants when the sun comes out, and it'll do it in 15 minutes when you have these cloudy sunny days and you're like, oh, it's cloudy today, it's no problem. And then the sun comes out for 5 minutes and it fries everything. Frost fabric will not fry your plants. You can leave these on. When we used to do these cages, we would leave the frost fabric on them until the plants were literally pushing against the cages, because it doesn't hurt them. And then you can just pull them off after that. But you can also pull them off if it's like, it's not you're not gonna have frost anymore. And then if May surprises you, you have to run back out and put them back on again. But so they're perfectly safe leaving them on there. You just need to get them off in time for the plant to get out from the cage as it's going through the cage. There was something else I was going to say about that and it went right out of my head. Okay, so I'm going to pull this guy up. One other little side note is that if you are using drip, so you can see my little drip head right here for this tomato. If you are using drip, make sure if you're using cages that you don't puncture your drip line sticking your cage in the ground.
So on the drip, how often are you watering and how many gallons per hour or whatever?
So my drip heads are 2 gallon per hour drip heads, and we are very sandy soil, like beach sand, sandy soil. And if you had been out here when we had those really, really bad downpours, the water stood for about 45 minutes and then it was gone. So we don't have a problem with drainage, but we do have a problem with losing nutrients because they're leaching out of the soil so fast because we're sandy, which is one of the reasons we need all this organic matter and compost. If you're on clay, if you have hard pan and you don't drain well, you don't want to use nearly as much water because you're gonna rot your plants. So there isn't a set, like for us right now, ours are coming on 3 days a week, so they go every other day, and then one time it skips 2 days for 45 minutes a day, and it's watering 2 gallons an hour. So that each plant is getting less than 2 gallons because it only comes on for 45 minutes, and that is where we're still tweaking it. One of the things that we're fighting fairly regularly on this property is blossom end rot. If you guys know what that is, where the bottom of the tomato gets a brown spot on it. Okay, blossom end rot is a calcium deficiency, and it is not necessarily because you have no calcium in your soil. Ours actually, we did soil tests, we've got great calcium. It's usually because your water the plant is not able to grab the calcium and bring it up into the plant fast enough. And that tells us, because of blossom end rot, we had to increase our water and increase our, we know we need to increase our organic matter, but as we get more organic matter and it can hold on to the water longer, then the plant has more time to grab the water and pull the calcium up into the plant. So when you have blossom end rot, it's not a disease. Your plant isn't going to die, and you can cut the rot off and still eat the tomato, but it's a calcium problem, and it's most often going to be because of a water issue, not a calcium issue. You can put eggshells in the hole. If you're going to do that, put them through a blender, because it takes forever for calcium to break down in an eggshell, and your plants won't have time to grab it. Or you can buy bone meal, has a good calcium level on it, and put some of that in the hole. Or you can have your soil tested and find out whether you've got good calcium or not. It would have been useless for us to add calcium to our soil because our calcium was actually a little higher than the average. So, you know, it narrows it down that, yeah, this is a water issue, and most of the time it's going to be a water issue. So with that, one of the things I wanted to mention is if you're going to go with drips, and you can look at our drip system, the old drip systems, if you guys have ever used them, they have the compression fittings where you push them together and you have to like push and push and push and push, and then once they lock, you can't ever take them apart again. Well, these new systems, you can take them apart 100 times, put them back together, change where you're going to put them. So they're super easy to use. And every time something changes, you're like, it's no big deal. I can just take them apart. I can cut something shorter. I can add something on. And they have all the different coupler fittings on them to make that work. And so I'm going to show you. This is a coupler where more than likely someone stuck a pitchfork through this and I had a hole, so I had to fix it. So this is just a plain coupler and it's closed right now. If I open it up, all the fittings for this drip system work like this. So now I've opened both sides up. It pops right out. Then I can change whatever I want to, or if I want to put it back together, I put it back in and I tighten it down. If you can't find these at Home Depot, order them online. We use Drip Depot or Drip Works, and they're super easy to get. They're inexpensive. One of the things we love, the old drip heads, they get clogged. You try to clear them. If you puncture too much, then they start squirting everywhere, and now you're stuck because you can't pull them out. You'll make a big hole. These are you can clean them. You just take the top off. They have a little diaphragm in here. I can get the diaphragm out. So you don't want to lose the diaphragm. like I just did. There he is. So it's this little rubber guy. So you take that thing out and you turn your line on, let it squirt up to clear the hole, and then make sure this, you can see through it because that's your head. Put the diaphragm back in. Make sure it lays flat. Put this back on. And now it's fixed. At the beginning of the season, before we're gonna turn these on because they've been sitting all winter and there's gunk in there, we do have filters on our lines because we are on a well, so we do have a lot of sediment. But we will go to the end, there's a little cap at the end that we take off. We turn this on, so we have a little on-off switch. Same companies that make these. We'll turn it off, turn the water on at the thing, then turn this on, let it squirt out the end, turn it off, put the end back on, and now we flush the line out. And then that way these won't get clogged as easy. And before I put the straw down, the last thing I do is check. I turn it on and make sure every single head has water coming out of it. And if you're not checking them, once you cover them with straw, you're not going to notice that it's clogged until your plant starts to wilt. And I'm just checking them all the time, and then I, run out and clean the head out, and it's fine. But these systems are amazing, and we love them. Okay, any questions? Wow, you guys are easy.
Didn't you mention something in your first talk about pinching the plant down so it's bushier as opposed to tall and
we did. We talked on the suckers. So I don't know if you can see this, and you can come closer if you need to, but at every leaf margin, you have these little suckers that come out. And those suckers are gonna go out this way. Actually, this is a sucker right here. So I had my leaf margin right here, and this is my main stem, and you can see the sucker right here is coming out of it. Some people want to keep their plants small, so they pinch all the suckers off. And if you've seen some folks are growing with the twine where they have the upper bar and they have the twine that hangs down like this, and they attach the plant going up the one string. The only way that works is if you remove all your suckers, because the plant will get so big that the string can't hold it. So most people who are growing their plants like that are wanting them to grow just one main stem that goes straight up, and then the leaves that are coming out, and it'll set fruit there. You're not going to get as much fruit off the plant because suckers produce fruit. So you're cutting down the amount of fruit that you're going to get, but if you're a smaller space and you want to put more plants in, you can put them 2 feet apart instead of 3 feet apart if they're growing on those strings. So you can get more plants, more varieties in an area. When you're talking about the pinching of them, we don't pinch. If you come back in August when we have our tomato tasting, the 3rd Saturday in August, you can see all these huge plants and how ridiculously large they get. Now, some of them don't get as big. In fact, the Orange Hat Micro, we're starting to do micro tomatoes. They only get this big. They'll be in the round bed around the edges this year. They are absolutely adorable, and they put on ridiculous amounts of fruit for such a small little plant. But these guys they'll come up over the tops. When you come back in August, we have shade screen on them. So we put a PVC tee on the tops of these. We see those PVCs that are sticking up around our oranges that we've had them covered. Those actually get moved over to here and stuck through the tees. And then we clip shade screen across the top. Because just like we were talking about at the other talk, when you get up into temperatures that are above 100 degrees and it's not cooling off at night, your plant will save its life by dropping its blossoms. And that's why you're like, why are all my blossoms dropping on the ground? Because it's either too hot or there's too much fluctuation. So we put the shade screen over the top when you come out for the tomato tasting, and this is why I really want bigger T-posts. They actually poke through the shade screen and start heading like up on the top, and then we're having to rip them out at the end of the season because they've gone up through the shade screen. So they can be really aggressive, and they need like good stuff to hold them together. Like those little cages that I was talking about will crush them. Within a month, your cages will be laying on the ground. So these are sturdy enough, and the field twine is sturdy enough to hold them up, and we don't pinch suckers. We don't have time to pinch suckers, for one, but it's very clear when you're out here in the late summer that we are not pinching suckers off of our plants because they are going in every direction. That too, just to reiterate, we've taken everything off the bottom. Like this leaf may end up being where it's touching the ground, and I'll come out and remove it. Any suckers that didn't come out in those leaf margins down below are still going to try to come out, and I don't want any growth down there. I want like at least this much where there's no growth. And so I'm going to be coming back through here when I'm running my twine, and I'm going to be clipping all those suckers off down at the bottom. And then once we've got the straw mulch down, it's also going to keep water from splashing up onto the plants, which is also going to cause foliar issues like diseases and viruses and things like that, which is why we don't want any water splashing up on the plants. So we live in arid, dry California normally, and you don't want your plants to get wet all growing season. You want your water to stay down at the bottom. Don't take a sprinkler to them. Don't spray them with a hose, because that's how you spread diseases, by bringing that level of humidity up. Did that answer your question?
It did, thank you.
Okay. Trying to think of what else. Okay. Back to the moisture, you were asking how much to water. Get a moisture meter, because your soil is going to be the thing that tells you when they need to be watered. And if you're sticking a moisture meter in the ground, they only cost like 10 bucks. They're super cheap. You just stick the moisture meter in the ground, and it's going to tell you whether your soil is too dry or not. And then if you're doing a drench with a well around your plants, you want to fill that drench and let it go completely down, and then you're going to water again after your moisture meter is telling you that your soil is dry.
What's the ideal reading on the moisture meter?
It's going to be, so it has green, yellow, red.
Okay.
Most of them do. And so you want to be in the green. If you're in the yellow, it's saying you're getting a little too dry. If you're in the red, you're way too dry.
Okay.
Yeah. And that way, that's really the best way to tell until you learn your soil and what your soil takes. And just like I was saying with us, when we get this soil to a place where it's got enough organic matter, we will be able to cut back on our water. But for now, we're still having to do a lot more water. And if you have clay and you do as much as we're doing in water, you will drown your plants. So you just want to make sure it's what is fitting for your plants. Okay, any other questions before we move on to something else?
Where did you say you get your drip stuff? Drip Depot and where else?
Drip Depot and Drip Works. And it's like .com, .net, something. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. So this is going to go back to, I have not talked about this since the tomato tasting last year. If you come to the tomato tasting this year, the talk that we'll be doing will be covering on how to save your seeds and other things that are appropriate for that time of year, instead of like the planting things, because then it's too late and you have to remember it for the next year. But we talk about composting and making your own compost. And I realize, like, you can look at our setup and go, I don't have that much room, or I don't have that much garden to do what you're doing. But I want to sell you, if you're not composting, I want you to sell you on the easiest way to compost, which is vermicomposting. It's a fancy word that means worm composting. If you drive by dairies now, you'll see a lot of them have these shallow rows that are going down, like, you know, laying out in their open areas of manure, that they're just making these shallow rows. They're turning all of their cow manure into worm castings. Worms only generally go about 18 inches deep, so you don't want to, like, if you have a really deep compost bed, they're not going to go past the 18 inches. They're going to stay up in there unless it dries out too much, and then they'll go deeper. But they tend to stay about 18 inches, which is why they have those shallow, long rows, so that they can get all of that manure turned into compost as quickly as possible. It doesn't cost them any electricity, doesn't cost them any work. They just let the worms sit in there and do the work, and then they sell off the worm castings. So if you want to come over here, I'm going to show you. So this bed here is our stagnant composting bed. This bed over here is our O2, which is forced air compost. This is a mini version of what we're going to be putting out by where the manure pile is. Forced air compost is amazing. It turns all of your raw material into compost in 30 days. So it's a great system, but there are a couple of drawbacks to it. One that we thought was not going to be a problem for us is people who do forced air compost, they put a roof over their compost system, because if you're in a rainy area, if it gets too wet, it stops the air from coming up from the bottom. So we have pipes under here that push air up with a air compressor, pushes air up through the system. If it gets too wet, the air can't get up, and so your system basically stops composting. Well, we didn't think that would ever be a problem. We put shade cloth, which is over on the other side. We put that over in the summer so that it doesn't dry out too much. But we were like, we don't need to put a roof on our compost system because it doesn't rain in California. And then 2023 got here. And so this, we had just taken out our last batch of compost, put it all over in the garden, filled it back up all the way up to the top of that pallet with fresh manure, flipped the system on, and 2 weeks later we got the crazy deluge that soaked this stuff so much that the air couldn't push it through. And so this system, we had to turn it off because it wasn't doing any good having the compressor running. It wasn't doing anything. This system over here is, you start with a handful of worms, and they're red worms. You throw them into your compost, and as long as they've got moisture and food, they're going to breed and go crazy and spread throughout your whole compost pile. So when we're harvesting what they've made off the top, all we have to do is literally save a handful of them and throw them back into the pile, and they'll immediately start reproducing again. And all the rest of this compost, which most of it is worm castings, which is the best compost you can make, and if you try to buy it in bags, you know how expensive it is, that it will be mostly worm castings. There will be a little bit of stuff that just naturally decomposes without the worms. The worms don't like oranges and they don't like onions, and so that stuff gets left behind for just regular composting to do. But as you're digging through, you're like, oh, there's, you know, some oranges, and you just move them over, and eventually decomposition will take over and break them down, but not as quickly as the worms do. So this guy we filled up at the same time as this guy. Both of them got soaked, but worms don't care. They're going to go through it no matter how drenched it is, and they're going to work on it. So this pile has been just doing its job since we filled it up. But what's interesting is when we came over here to start pulling this stuff out, because we've got to get it out so we can start a new pile that isn't this wet, the worms had wiggled their way through the wood and were now taking over this pile and composting it. And so, like I said, they're very industrious. I'm going to see if I can find some of them for you guys so you can see how wet this stuff is. So see my worms? Yeah. And this whole pile is full of them. We've taken out like 2 wheelbarrows full, and it's solid worms in here. And you'll find in your worm composting, you will literally, it look like spaghetti. There will be so many worms in there. And as long as they have food, they will not slow down. Food and moisture, they will not slow down. So,
hey, Miss Mo.
Yeah.
Let me just make a clarification real quick. So the forced air system, it's not a compressor. It's actually a blower.
It's a blower.
It's like a
sorry.
like a bounce house blower.
On this small one, the
On
bigger one will be a different kind of blower.
It'll be a bigger blower.
Yeah. So all of that to say, if you have a plastic tub that like you put sweaters in and slide under your bed, you can do worm composting. It's that easy. All you have to do is put a little bit of soil in the bottom of it, poke some holes in the top so that they have air, and then throw your kitchen scraps in there and a couple of worms or a handful of worms and let them go to town. And as long as it stays moist and as long as there's food for them to eat, they will keep reproducing. Now, if you're not going to make a bigger compost outside that you need more worms, put them in your garden bed and let them eat stuff in your garden bed and make your soil healthier. Or if you have friends, give some to your friends so that they can start the same thing. And they will break down all of your kitchen scraps. If you don't want to use like dog or cat poop, but any animal that eats vegetable or eats vegetation, you can use manure in. And chickens who are omnivores, so they do eat meat, but they are safe to use chicken manure in your pile too. So you can put poop in there, you can put all of your kitchen scraps except for onions and oranges because they won't eat them. Won't kill them, they just won't eat them. And I should say citrus, not just oranges, but citrus and onions. And just put it up on top and make sure it stays moist. Haley, yeah.
Is there any concern with heat and temperature?
Keep them in a shady spot.
Okay.
So they will not die getting too cold. They will slow down because if it's shallow and you've got it outside and we're getting down into the 30s, that a lot of times they'll just slow down because they can't go deeper if you've got them in a plastic tub. So they'll just slow down and won't speed up. But if you take that shallow tub and you stick it out in the sun, then they have no place to go. You know, when it gets too hot, they can't go deeper, so you can fry them. So just put them in a shady place. They don't need sun. And the only thing that saves these guys, you know, we put the shade screen over them, but even if we didn't have the shade screen, they would just go down deeper if it got too hot in the surface. And then when it cools off, they'll come back up to the surface and they'll literally grab the stuff. Like you can see the raw stuff that we've been throwing on here that hasn't been pulled down yet. And the only reason they haven't pulled it down is because I let it dry out over the last week. And so they need the moisture to be able to come up. They can't expose themselves to the air or they dry out too fast. So if I was to move that, more than likely, down to where it's moist, I'm gonna find them close to it. Yeah, see all of them? How many of them are in there? But they've gotta stay in the moist area.
So during the middle of summer, do you hose that down at all?
We do a little bit, but very little. And we're learning, depending on what you're using. If you had a bunch of dry leaves, you've got to make sure everything's wet to begin with. But with this pile, even when it's halfway in the middle of summer, like we can go months without watering it. And they still got plenty of moisture in the middle of the pile. They just don't have moisture on the top because we haven't been watering it. So sometimes, because it gets crazy in the summertime out here, sometimes I run out here and go, oh, the top's dry, and I'll hit it with some water just to help them to come up and grab the stuff. But I'm not going to kill them because they've got plenty of room to get away from the dry to go down below. So worm composting is like the thing. And when we started this pile, so a friend of ours, she had originally gotten her worms from us, and they have these fancy, and if you're like wanting to go that route, go for it. They have these fancy worm composters that have like trays that are in levels, and the worm castings drop to the next level as the worms make them. And so when they get to the very bottom, you just pull the tray out and it's all worm castings, and you just spread it, and then you move it up to the top and you fill it with more kitchen scraps, and they move up there, and it's all contained and easy to take care of, and they're really cool if you're doing it in a small amount. They're just more expensive than a sweater tub that you can, you know, get and punch some holes into, but they are really cool. So this friend has one of those fancy ones, so I gave her a handful of worms, and she's like years, you know, she's been going through. We were talking, we had just gotten out here. When we sold our old place, I couldn't take my worms with me because I didn't know when we were going to have property, and we moved into a little trailer. And so I had to leave them behind. So I was talking to her about, I need to get worms. She goes, I've got so many worms, I need to give them to somebody. So she brought me, it was literally like a handful of worms, and we threw them into a pile, you know, stacked up this high. And within 3 months, my whole entire pile was full of them. So they really reproduce quickly as long as you're giving them just the minimum of what they need. And now all of our garden beds that have had compost put in them are also full of worms, because as we're spreading the compost, we're spreading worms, and I just save a handful of them and throw them back in here again. So they're wonderful little creatures. We love our worms. So, but I wanted to share that with you because I make mistakes. They take over. They fix it.
What did you start that pile out with?
Oh, so most of our pile is horse manure, and some chicken manure, and then it's going to have some straw and hay and scraps of things thrown in there, and then all of our kitchen scraps. We keep a kitchen can right outside of our sliding door, and we throw kitchen scraps in there. Anything that isn't chicken worthy, if it's chicken worthy, it goes through the body of a chicken first, and then it ends up in here. But if it's like banana peels or even the onions and the citrus, they get thrown in here because the chickens don't like onions and citrus either. And so we throw them in here, and the just decomposition takes care of them. But they love banana peels, so they grab those. Like you can see, they've dried out on top. Banana peels dry out really quickly. It would have been better if I hadn't been in a hurry when I threw them in there. If I had taken a shovelful and this stuff and thrown it on top, it would have kept those peels from drying out. But eventually they'll get to them. But it's mostly horse manure, just because horses poop at least 12 times a day. Fun fact. And we have a poop patrol. We have poop patrol shirts that say on the back of them, they poop it, we scoop it, because that's all they do is poop. And horse manure is fantastic compost. It's all organic, there's no meat eater in there. There's just eating hay and grass and whatnot, so it breaks down really fast. And so we fill these up with, our big pile is way out there. We bring it in with the tractor and we load it. And as he's dumping it, I can tell that there's dry spots, and I hit it with the hose just to make sure that there's some moisture there. But if we miss a spot, sometimes when I'm digging through here, I'll get clumps that are completely dried out, and the worms won't touch it because there's no moisture in there. So we just have to scoop it and put it on the new pile and then wet it down, and then they'll take over. But it breaks down pretty quickly. I can't remember when we filled these. Was it January?
Something like that.
Yeah. So whenever it was right before the first insane amount of rain hit.
The first time we got rain was December.
Yeah, but that wasn't.
You're talking about, oh yeah, I know.
Soaked it so bad.
Yeah, it was January.
So yeah. So this bed, and you can see, this is funny. These are onions. These are old onions that I threw in the pile, and this is how much my worms like my onions. They're like, nope, we're not touching it. So now I've got onions growing in the compost pile, and a potato, you can see. So, yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
Do you have to worry about, because I have goats and I have chickens, but heat from the manure, I know it has to go through where it's too hot to put on your garden.
Right.
Do the worms help with that?
They do not. So here's the downside to vermicomposting is it doesn't get hot enough to kill weed seeds or diseases. And so that does. And a good stagnant pile well, it's not stagnant. You have to turn, they talk about turning a compost pile because you have to get oxygen in there. The forced air does that for us. That's one of the nice things about it, is that it's pushing the air through all the time. And so it's, as long as there's the right amount of moisture, and we have a meter that we stick in there to make sure it's getting hot enough. When we filled this pile last summer and we flipped the switch the first time, it was 69 degrees when we checked it, when we flipped the switch, and 2 days later it was at 180 degrees. So it goes up super fast and it kills all the bad stuff. And then you turn down how often the air is going through it. And if you were doing a pile without O2, you would have to keep turning it to make that happen. And then you're sticking your meter in there to find out how hot it is. It gets down to about 120 is where you want that to stay. It's like between 90 and 120, but 120 is the best. and it's cooking. That's when you'll see like steam coming out of your pile and all that stuff. And that's when all of the good bacteria take over. You'll have mushrooms start to grow on top of it. That's like the most exciting. It's like you go outside and you're like, yes, I've got mushrooms. Because then you know your temperatures are perfect and your moisture level is perfect. And so then it's, all you need is a couple days of it up at 160, 180 degrees to kill all the bad stuff. And then once it goes down, then it actually starts growing all those little however you say that word, I can never say it. But it's all these little white, looks like white hairs that are growing through your compost. Huh? Mycelium, thank you. I can never remember how to say that. And that's like telling you your soil is alive, and it's alive with great stuff. And so it's doing its job, and it's making compost, and it's really exciting. And having our compost thermometer is like this long. So you're shoving it halfway down and then all the way down to check your temperatures to see if it's cooking at the right amount. The nice thing about these guys is you don't got to do any of that. You just let the worms, they know what to do. So they do their thing, but they won't kill disease. That being said, all of our tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants, at the end of the season, we do not put them in our compost pile. They go into our dumpster, or they get hauled off for green waste. And someone was asking earlier today about buying city compost. I strongly do not recommend that, because city compost is all that waste. So all of my stuff that I wouldn't put in my compost pile is getting hauled off to city compost. And if you buy it and they have not cooked it properly, then all those weed seeds and diseases and all this stuff, that's in the stuff that you're buying. And then they, most of the time, because they don't want to wait long enough to cook it, they add ammonia to it. And it literally, like, it smells like ammonia, reeks of ammonia. And ammonia at small levels will turn your lawn beautifully green, because it's the same as ammonium sulfate. It turns plants green. It's high in nitrogen. We don't want it near our tomatoes because it's high in nitrogen. So it'll turn green leafy things green, as long as you mix it in enough that it's not too strong in burning them, because it literally will burn any plant if it's not mixed with enough soil. And that's why too, someone had brought up when we talked about it last time, your compost should smell like dirt. Your compost should not smell like ammonia. It should not smell like poop. If it does, it's not done cooking, and it's not going to help your plants, and it could hurt your plants. So make sure whatever compost you're buying smells like dirt, okay? Or make it yourself, because then you know what's going into it. So, okay, questions?
The red worms, anywhere you get them?
Yeah, so I wish I would have had time. I would have put them in containers. At the tomato tasting, we sell containers for $2 full of the worms. Because this bed is fairly new, I'm going to have to dig around in here quite a bit to fill a container. In August, it's almost all worms. So it literally takes us 5 minutes to go through and fill containers up and sell them. You can get them at bait shops.
Small red worms, not night crawlers.
Yeah, not night crawlers. They're red worms. And night crawlers aren't bad, they just don't work very hard. And the red worms reproduce and work really hard. So, yeah. But bait shops usually have them.
Where do you get your straws?
Feed stores. And there is thank you for saying that. There is a huge difference between hay and straw. Do not use hay in your beds. Number one, don't pay for hay. It's going $25, $30 a bale right now. Straw that used to be $6, $7 a bale is going for $14. So even though it's way more expensive than we would like to be paying, it is way cheaper than hay, and it doesn't have all of the nitrogen left in it that hay does, and it doesn't have the seeds from whatever that hay is in it either. Now the straw still does. Around here, when you buy straw, it's 99% of the time going to be wheat straw. If you go closer to Sacramento, you can get rice straw. It really doesn't matter. It's what's left over after they've harvested the grain. So because we are using wheat straw, if you look at the really tall grass right there at the end, that's all wheat that was left in the wheat straw that sprouts. I literally pull it up and just lay it back down again, because then it's just more straw. and it pulls up really easy. You can also feed it to your chickens and your cows and whatnot, but it's just wheat that is growing from the straw, but it's a lot less than what you would have if you used hay, and the hay will compress more too and cause rot and all kinds of stuff. So use straw. Escalon feed, Oakdale feed, Modesto feed, any feed store is going to have straw. And you can get it at Tractor Supply, but they're going to charge you a fortune for like this little tiny, it's like literally like this big. For straw, you could get an entire bale of straw. And if you don't have like a truck to put a bale of straw in, take some garbage bags with you, buy your bale of straw, ask them if they'll cut it open and fill your garbage bags with it and just load it into your vehicle that way. And it's, you know, one bale of straw seems like it's a lot, but I use about, for that bed right there, I would use about a bale, maybe 3/4 of a bale to cover that one bed right there. So it doesn't go as far as you think it's going to. And we go through about 30 bales of straw a season, just getting everything covered, and then also feeding a little bit to our fat horses who can't have as much hay as they'd like to have.
Did you make your little wire cages yourself?
No, thank you. Okay, the company is right here in California, and they are called Diggers Gopher Guard. And if you can get them at the nurseries, Morris Nursery, or West Turf Nursery, they carry them, or you can just order them online, and I've literally gotten them the next day because they're so close and they're really good at getting them out. Chicken wire is useless. It will rust in one season. The holes are too big. When you go to dig the stuff, like dig in that bed, you're gonna punch right through it because it's so thin. These are, the gopher wire has smaller holes, thicker wire, and they triple galvanize it. And some of my gopher cages are 15, 20 years old, and the only reason that they end up getting thrown away is because somebody dug them up from the side instead of where the ridge is. Back here, let me grab one of these. Sometimes when we've got volunteers out here and I wasn't really clear on how to dig them up in the fall and the winter, they dig them up from this side. And if you stick a shovel through this and pull, it's going to rip holes in them. And that's really the only reason that we have to throw them away. But these cages are at least 8 years old. And then, like I said, some of them are 15, 20 years old. And do you see rust? So the galvanizing makes a really big difference. When they're new, you can see that he does a green strip on the top. So it helps you know how deep to put them in, because you want the top to still be sticking up, or else the gopher will just go like this and get inside there. So when we dig these up at the end of the season, we dig from this end so that we can push against this metal piece instead of on the wire. And then you can flatten them at the end of the season if you want to store them. We just usually throw them in a pile, and then in the spring just pull them out and start sticking them in the ground again. They also make wire rolls, and we have some, we're doing, because this is a test garden, we're trying all kinds of things, and the no-till is a big thing that everybody's getting into, and I love the no-till idea, but we have really bad gophers, and so we run the wire in the no-till beds. Doesn't work, like it's a whole lot of work if you're gonna do till, because you have to pull that wire up. But what we do is we dig in the like a trench that's in a V, like this. Take all the dirt out so the trench is like that, and then we lay the wire down it, and then we walk like this down the middle of it to push it down so it's in a V, and then we fill it back in with dirt, and so just the edges of it are sticking out of the ground. I'm trying to think, actually that one has it in it. You can just barely see the edge sticking up.
Can you get that wire to the nursery too?
They don't usually carry the rolls, but you can order it. Like I said, just order it online and you'll get it quick. And their shipping is, they're really good with their shipping. I would say unless you live really close to a nursery, and if they carry these, ask them, can you order me a roll, so they pay the shipping. But it may end up costing you less just in gas and whatever their markup is, to just order it and have it delivered to you. Yeah, and that stuff just, it's in there, and we just keep putting compost on top of it, and then obviously the weeds are really happy right now because we haven't touched those beds. So
do you do that V on where you plant your plants?
Yeah.
Or on the, and then you plant the plants
in the
middle,
very deepest part in the middle.
And then do you use those also?
No. That's in
Just
place
that.
of it. Yeah.
Okay.
These we only use for tomatoes. We tend to use with the peppers and eggplants because they're 2 feet apart. We do the wire rolls for the peppers and eggplants because these things, we'd have so many of them in there. And they make a smaller one that's like for a 4-inch, it's like a 4-inch pot one, but it's for putting bulbs. Like if you have gophers that eat your bulbs, that you can stick those in. I usually can't get the peppers to get in that thing. It's too small, but they're great for bulbs. And the funnest part is like knowing that they can't get to your plant. I was telling Haley earlier, day before yesterday, I was cleaning this bed out for this talk, and right at the end I had a gopher come up, and I was like, great, I'll be able to show how my gopher hawk works because I've got a gopher right here. So I cleared the thing, stuck the gopher hawk in, went in for lunch, came back out, and I'd already caught him. So I love gopher hawks. If you guys have never used them and you have a gopher problem, it's the best trap for gophers. And now last night we found another bed that's got gophers in it. So after we're done today, we're going to be sticking some in there to snag them. But if I hadn't caught him, if he'd come up after I'd planted the tomatoes in here and it's covered in straw so you don't see the mounds coming up, it doesn't matter. They can't get to the tomato. And they're not interested in the little tiny hair roots because those are going to grow out through the cage. The gophers aren't interested in that. They want your plant. And so they're going to dig around and keep hitting it, and when they can't get to it, they'll just move on to the next thing. So yeah, these guys are great.
And what was the name of the drip systems that you recommended?
So different companies use different names. So if you go to Drip Works or Drip Depot, and it's like Dry Lock is one company. Like all of them, if you just look at them, they have the twisties on them.
Okay.
The other ones, the compression ones, they don't. You have to like push them in and then you can't pull them back out again. And they should be outlawed because they're stupid. So. All right.
Yep.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.